Today's video is a Marvel Champions living card game, Ant-Man Aggression build. Here is the deck build. First, take all of your Ant-Man hero cards. Next, one copy of Energy, Genius, and Strength. We're moving on to one copy of Combat Training, your basic sort of resource management, Avengers Mansion, Helicarrier, Quinn Carrier, one of each. Your basic survival cards, one copy of Downtime, one copy of Endurance. Next, we move into Aggression, two copies of Uppercut, three copies of Counterattack, three copies of Relentless Assault, three copies of Moment of Triumph, three copies of You'll Pay for That. Now let's go into our allies. One copy of Nick Fury, She-Hulk, Tigra, and Hulk. For your opening hand and mulligan action, I'm suggesting that you get and look for Ant-Man's Helmet. This is a fantastic card that's in the Ant-Man hero cards. Anytime you turn into a hero form, that could be the tiny or the giant form for Ant-Man, you get to do some sort of special ability. Since the focus of Ant-Man is to constantly be changing forms, this is a great card to have. If you turn into tiny form, you get to draw a card. If you move into giant form, you get to heal 2 points of damage. That 2 points of damage adds up a lot over the game, and it keeps you to staying in hero form a lot longer than some of the other heroes, so it's a fantastic option. Secondarily, look for your resource management / card drawing style basic cards, Avengers Mansion, Helicarrier, and Quinn Carrier in your opening hand and mulligan action. The survivability in this deck is pretty decent. Ant-Man starts with 12 hit points. You're going to throw in your two basic survival cards, one copy of Downtime, one copy of Endurance, so you can get his hit point total up to 15. And then when you're turning into giant form and you have Ant-Man's helmet out, that's going to heal 2 points of damage. Also, if you spend the Pim particles while you are in giant form, you can heal 2 points of damage as well. So that's pretty cool. Now, if you're in the tiny form, you can draw a card, but that really doesn't have too much to do with survivability. So when you're playing these cards, be really mindful too. If you can flip between your hero mode, between the tiny and the giant, and you're low on hit points, if you're going to play a card and you can flip, definitely flip to the giant form before you start playing those cards down, and you can get some extra hit points back. So staying in the game longer, staying in hero form is always a better option when you're playing Marvel Champions. As I said before, the key to playing Ant-Man is constantly changing forms. So when you turn into the giant version of Ant-Man, you get to deal 1 damage to an enemy. This is very similar to She-Hulk's hero ability. When you flip, you could do 2 points of damage. I really like this mechanic a lot, especially for this character Ant-Man. It really adds a lot to the game. In addition to when you change into hero form, you get to do a point of damage. There's also 2 copies of Giant Strength in the Ant-Man hero cards. This will add +1 attack until the end of the turn to Ant-Man. So when he's in giant form, he has a 3 attack. There are 2 copies of Giant Strength. So that's really fantastic. You're going to buff up to a 5 attack. Then having your 1 copy of Combat Training in the deck gives you a 6 attack. Plus when you flip, you get 1 point of damage. So that's almost like having a 7 attack. You can take down a lot of the heavy minions, and you could do a lot of damage to the villain as well. So really focus on switching forms. I literally recommend, if you can do it, switching between tiny and giant form every single round. And there's some advantages to that. So the giant form is very combat oriented, damage dealing, and then the tiny one is geared more towards thwarting. And, you know, as everybody knows, you need a blend of both those. So I think that this actually makes a pretty decent solo deck. When I was playing it, I didn't seem to have as many of the thwarting problems as I do with a lot of other solo decks. And I'll show you some of the cards I put in that are aggression oriented that also help with threat management. But think of it this way. If you're constantly getting into giant form, you can hit for that 7 points of damage, and it hits really hard, and that's something that you can rely on through the course of the game. So I highly recommend trying that out. Here is the tiny version of Ant-Man in the middle of the screen. So when you flip to this version of the hero, you can remove a threat from a scheme. That's pretty cool. Then something else you'll notice is that the thwart on Ant-Man increases, the attack decreases to 1, and the defense on the character decreases to 2. So your primary stats are going to change based upon the size of your character. That's a really cool mechanic. The one thing I really love about the tiny version, there are 3 copies of Army of Ants in the hero cards. This is a fantastic card, and I love having all 3 of these out. It allows you, while you're in tiny form, you can exhaust the Army of Ants to do 1 point of damage to an enemy. That can be the villain, that can be a minion. And what's great about it is that you can spend those in 1 point increments. I can't tell you how many times that you're playing Marvel Champions and, let's say a minion has 1 point of damage left and you attack for 3. It just feels like you're wasting those points. But with Army of Ants, you can chip away and sometimes kill like a minion or 2 minions. Or the best thing about the Army of Ants is chipping away and getting rid of toughness cards on the enemies. Specifically the minion or the villain. I mean, oftentimes the villain has a toughness card. And so when you attack the villain, you don't want to waste, all those extra points. So you can basically exhaust the Army of Ants, get rid of the toughness token, and then you can also chip away at minions on the same turn. It's extremely versatile, okay? So throw in, when you switch to giant form, you also get to do a point of damage. That's why I kind of recommend, once you get all these cards out, you're switching back and forth. So let's say you start in the tiny form, you can do 3 points of damage, distribute that damage any way you see fit, then you flip to giant form, you can do another point. So that's essentially 4 points of damage once your character is fully out on the table. And that's a fantastic option and opportunity for chipping away. Next, there's only 1 copy of Hive Mind in the deck, and it kind of keys off of the Army of Ants cards. So don't forget that you have it. It's a great way to remove a lot of threat sort of later game once your deck is fully established. So definitely check that out as well. This is a quick note on some subtle strategies when you're playing Ant-Man, specifically when it comes to changing between your tiny and giant form. One thing, once you get it into your head, it's really powerful, is that let's say on a turn I am in Ant-Man form and I have a lot of threats built up on the table, so I need to manage and mitigate those better. So think about when you are going to flip your character, and think of it almost as you can do 2 sort of actions in a row on 2 different turns in the same form, and then you can flip. So remember that you can flip after you are exhausted. That's really key to part of this deck as well. So as an example, let's say there's a lot of threat on the table. I'm going to go ahead and convert to the tiny version of Ant-Man, which immediately when I flip over, I can remove a threat. Then I can exhaust Ant-Man to remove 2 threat from a scheme as well. Now, if I stay in this form, next turn, when I ready, I can start in the tiny form again, and I can thwart again to get rid of 2 points. Then if I feel like it, I can flip to the giant form, in which I'll still be exhausted, but then I can start doing some other stuff. So think of it that way too, that if you get into a bind, you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to the order of operations and when you're flipping and when you're readying in between 2 different turns. So take that into account when you're playing this character. We're going to talk really quickly about wrist gauntlets. This is an upgrade that's in the Ant-Man deck. Now, one thing that might be a little bit more subtle, so the way that the deck was built, there are a lot of physical and energy resources throughout the deck. So I just kind of gave you a quick smattering on the screen so you can see that you can activate once the deck is running and operational. You do have a lot of these events that are cycling through the deck that you can use to power your wrist gauntlets to either do the stun action or the confuse action on the enemy. So keep that, kind of in the back of your mind when you're playing the game. Once you have the wrist gauntlets out, it does give you a lot of flexibility once you start cycling through your deck to confuse and stun the enemy. Each of the cards on the screen, there are 3 copies present in the deck, and I really like them. They're very cheap cards, very cost effective, and they do sort of different effects, but they kind of add to the theme of this deck. It's a very decent sort of middle of the road solo deck. I found it to be, decent survival, decent threat mitigation, a little bit higher on the damage side because it's aggression. But, things like counterattack, the villain and enemies, they're going to be attacking you anyway, so why not get something out of that? Especially when the villain attacks you and hits you like a freight train, maybe it's 5, 6, 7, 8 points of damage. You can counterattack and hit the villain back. That's a fantastic option. Very, very cheap. preparation style card. You can only have one out at a time. Not a big deal. Another one that is brand new is called Moment of Triumph, and I really like this card. And as I mentioned before in the video, in Marvel Champions, time and time again, you run into the encounter where, let's say a minion has, just one hit point left, and you hit it for 4 or 5, 6 points of damage, and it feels like you're almost kind of wasting those extra points. So Moment of Triumph really fits well into this deck with staying in hero form as long as possible. So if you attack and defeat an enemy, you can heal 1 damage from your hero for each point of excess damage. So let's say the minion has 1 hit point left and you hit it for 5. You play this card, it's a 0 cost event, and you heal 4 hit points from that. That's fantastic. So throw in all the other stuff that we talked about, so Ant-Man's helmet, the Pym particles. You can stay in hero mode a lot longer, and that allows you to switch back and forth between your hero forms and do a lot of cool things. And then finally, I really love this card. It's called You'll Pay for That. And once again, it's, the villain is going to be attacking you anyway, so why not get something out of it? And this one simply says, after the villain attacks you, remove 1 threat from a scheme for each damage you took to a maximum of 5. And once again, this is a fantastic way, very, very cost effective. The villain's going to be attacking you anyway, so why not get something out of it? So think of it this way, we can do counterattack actions, plus we can do this thwart action as well. So you can really chip away at those threats. So instead of spending your time thwarting, you can get rid of 5 threats in 1 attack. That's fantastic. That's a lot of economy. It also makes this deck a really solid solo deck. So I highly recommend using these cheap aggression cards. This is really the first time I put this combination together, because Moment of Triumph is brand new at this point, but try putting them together. Really, really cost effective, really sort of fun play style, and I think it fits really well with the Ant-Man Aggression theme. This deck also has 7 sort of direct damage style cards in it, so you can see these just listed on the screen. This is where you're going to get a lot of damage output. So obviously you've seen some of the other techniques, and these are a little bit more lower damage yields. You have a lot of that chip damage. You have a lot of stuff that goes through toughness counters. So you're not going to see really any piercing style attacks in this deck. You really don't need it with all of the chip damage that you have. So when you look at all this and you throw it together, the damage output in this deck is pretty awesome, honestly. So think about the giant form that you have. When you're using the giant strengths cards in addition, then you can start using this stuff. So the damage output is fantastic. Don't really have to go too much into these. They pretty much speak for themselves. I think at this point, it's pretty clear that this deck really has a lot of advantages when you're changing form. There's 2 copies of Resize in the deck. It's a 0 cost event, and you get to draw a card when you change to any of your hero forms, so you swap from one hero form to the other. This is great, and this is fantastic, and it allows you to do a couple different conversions in the same turn, so you can get a lot of cool stuff happening when you do this. It gives you a lot of versatility. So all in all, the Ant-Man Aggression deck is a great solo deck. If you're looking for something that you could use on a lot of the newer sorts of scenario packs, this was working really, really well, surprisingly well, and I had a lot of fun playing it. A lot of times I don't necessarily play the aggression aspect all that much. I think it's kind of, a little bit single-sided, but I think a lot of the cards that I add to this deck adds an extra layer and dimension to the playability of aggression. It felt really good having, a lot of those cards like Moment of Triumph, Counterattack, and You'll Pay for That, mixed with a lot of those direct damage style cards. In addition, the chip damage is a lot of fun. Changing forms is a lot of fun. So I highly recommend playing this deck. I want to thank you today for spending your time with me, and as always, have fun gaming.